you're a narcissist, and you keep making mistakes, and you're not respecting me, and you're betraying. And all this is basically not understanding how human behavior works. So often I hear people judging themselves and beating themselves up over ideas like, oh, I made a mistake, I screwed up, or I keep sabotaging, or I keep, messing up, or whatever. And I'd like to address that topic today because if we look very carefully at the times we think other people make mistakes, we sometimes are projecting, or often projecting, our values onto them and expecting them to live in our values. And therefore, we're expecting them to live outside their own values, and they're making decisions based on their values. And then when we expect them to live in our values, we're going to end up feeling betrayed. We're going to feel like they're screwing up. They feel like they're not living up to expectation. Anytime somebody doesn't live up to our expectation, our dopamine levels go down and we feel sorrowed and kind of angry and unmet expectation. Anytime they exceed our expectation, we feel the joy and all this other higher dopamine response. But it's unrealistic to expect somebody to live in our values. So anytime we're proud and looking down on somebody and projecting our values onto them and expecting them to live in our values, we're setting ourselves up for betrayal. We're setting ourselves for thinking they keep making a mistake and they're wrong, and we need to fix them and change them and get them to be more like the way we want. And this is an illusion. They're not actually making mistakes in their value system. They're making an assessment and making a decision based on their values in that moment with the information that they've got. And in their value system, it's not a mistake. They're making a decision based on what they're perceiving. But in our perception, in our values, we may label them a mistake. Many times when people hire people in a company, they don't realize that if the individual does not feel that the job responsibilities is helping them fulfill what they value most, and it's not helping them fulfill their life, they'll keep doing things that are more fulfilling. And then you'll think, well, I've hired the wrong person, and in some cases you have not screened that individual out to see if they're really engaged and inspired to do the work. And so that's a lesson in feedback to let you know that who you're hiring. But to label them and say, well, they keep making mistakes, they keep not doing what I've asked, is an expectation of them to just live in your values. So if you're an employer and you're employing people, you want to know a very simple thing is how specifically is the job duties helping them fulfill what's most meaningful to them. Nobody goes to work for the sake of a company. They go to work for fulfilling their values. If they are engaged and are inspired to do the work and they can see how the job responsibilities will do that, the probability of you labeling them making mistakes goes down because they're fulfilling what's valuable to them and they're making decisions according to that. If you also expect yourself to live in somebody else's values, let's say you infatuate with somebody and put them on a pedestal and inject some of their values into your life, and you're too humble to admit what you see in them is inside you, and you playing small to them and inject their values, and you try to live in their values, you'll think, what am I doing wrong? I keep sabotaging. I keep having limited beliefs. I keep not being disciplined. I'm not focused. I keep making mistakes because you're trying to live in somebody else's value when in fact you're here designed to live in your own. Now, if you can see how you can fulfill your own values by fulfilling theirs, that's fine. You can do that. But in reality, many people are going around thinking, I keep making mistakes. I keep screwing up. I keep having limited beliefs. I keep having sabotage. I keep, not being focused. In 1980s, I asked many groups that I was speaking to write down the number one question you'd like to have addressed in this presentation, and just to gather data to see what people are interested in. And believe it or not, one of the most common things in the 1980s that I found was, how do I stay focused? Many people are trying to live in other people's values and then wondering why they can't stay focused and they're not disciplined and they're not staying on track. And that's because they're trying to live in somebody else's values and trying to be somebody they're not instead of being who they are. And this is very common. So as long as you go around and project your values onto others, you're going to expect them to live in your values and you're going to feel betrayed. And you're going to feel that they're not living up to what you expect and thinking they're making mistakes, and you want to fix them and change them. And people want to be loved for who they are, and who they are is a reflection of what they value most. Their highest value is their ontological identity, and that's what their life revolves around. So if you don't know what that is and you expect them to live outside that, you're going to feel that they're making mistakes and label them, you know, incompetent. You're going to put all kind of labels on people. But in their values, they're very competent. In their values, they don't make mistakes. In their values, they're doing quite well, except that they're not doing it in your values. So it's very important to stop and reflect and look at what your highest values are, look at what other people's highest values, and if you want them to do something that's important to you, so they're less likely to make, quote, a mistake, then articulate what you want done in a way where they're getting their highest values met, so then they have an engaged position where they're going to do it, and then you don't think they make mistakes. But if they are not seeing the correlations between what you want done and what their values are, they're going to make decisions based on their values, and you're going to think there's something wrong with them. You're going to want to fix them. And this happens in relationship. Two people that are in a relationship with two different sets of values, two hierarchy of values. If you can't see how their highest values help you fulfill yours, you're going to want to fix them. If they can't see how your highest values help them fulfill theirs, they're going to want to fix you. If two people are in their amygdala and they're driven for pride and thinking their values are right and your values are wrong, imagine those two clashing. You got a lot of conflict there. And you both keep thinking yourselves are narcissists. They're a narcissist. You're a narcissist. And you keep making mistakes. And you're not respecting me. And you're betraying. And all this is basically not understanding how human behavior works. How that people make decisions according to their values, not yours. And they don't make mistakes in their values. They're making an assessment according to the data that they're perceiving. And it's only labeled a mistake by somebody who has a different set of values many times. So watch out for the projection of the idea that they're mistaken. You may be thinking, well, you keep making mistakes, but that's because you're expecting yourself to live outside your own highest values. And that's the frustration. I have people, they go out and they say, well, I want to be financially independent. And they don't have a real value on financial independence. They have a value on buying immediate gratifying consumables that depreciate in value. And they can't seem to get ahead. And they keep thinking, I keep making mistakes. I keep being sidetracked. I keep not being disciplined. And they expect themselves to be doing something that's not really important to them. But they think it's important to them. They wish it was important to them, but it's not really important to them. Your hierarchy of values dictates your destiny and makes all your decisions. All your perception, decisions, and actions are based on it. If you expect yourself to live outside that, you're going to feel betrayed. You're going to feel frustrated. You're going to end up self-depreciating. A lot of self-depreciation comes from expecting yourself to live in other people's values, to try to be second at being somebody else. That's why the law of contrast leads to this. Let me give you an example. If you have a beaker of water that's really cold, say 40 degrees, a beaker of water that's 72 degrees, tepid, and another beaker of water that's 140 degrees, hot, if you put a thermometer in each one, you'll get those readings, 40, 72, 140. But if you take your hand and put it in the 40 degree, make it cold for a minute, then stick it in the 27 or 72 degrees, the tepid, it'll feel like 90 degrees in comparison. And if you take the 140 degrees and stick it in there and go, ooh, burn, and then stick it in the tepid, it'll feel like 50 degrees. So the second you compare yourself to somebody else, you'll have a subjectively misinterpretation of the actual temperature. The second you compare yourself to somebody else, you'll have a subjective bias interpretation, thinking there's mistakes. You'll over or undershoot. That's what mistakes are. It's based on the law of contrast. So that anytime we compare ourselves to other people, we automatically increase the probability of labeling us or them mistaken. And this creates all kind of gyrations and emotions and all kind of punishments and false attribution biases and false causalities and projections and injections, and stop us from happening to be inspired by our life and seeing the higher order and the so-called perfection that's in our lives. We basically go around and thinking there's a big mistake. We keep screwing up. We keep sabotaging, as I've said. But actually, it's just a comparison. And that's why it's not wise to compare yourself to other people. It's wise to compare your daily actions to what you value most. If you compare your daily actions and prioritize your actions and stick to highest priorities, you will feel most fulfilled, least amount of mistakes. And if you understand what other people's highest values are and make sure that they can see how what you're asking them to do matches that, they won't make mistakes. You won't label them making mistakes. They'll be doing what they're inspired to do. They're making perceptions, decisions, and actions accordingly. So the idea that do I really make mistakes um, is an interesting question. Maybe they're only mistakes based on the comparison and based on the projection of somebody else's values or our values onto somebody else. And therefore, we actually have a higher order of what's going on in life. A lot of times we think, I have people in the breakthrough experience, my signature program, people coming almost every week asking, I really screwed up here. I really feel guilty about this. I really feel that I messed up here, made a big mistake. I should have done this. I'm supposed to have done this. And I go in there and I do what I call the Demartini method on them. I have them go in there and find out what they did and how it served the people and how it served them and balance out the equation. And then they discover that in their values, they didn't make a mistake. But the other individual had an expectation and projected their values onto them and labeled them that way. And then they were looking up to this individual, injecting those values, and then labeling themselves mistaken and feeling ashamed. And this is because we just don't take the time to balance out the equation, and we don't realize that we're living in our values and they're living in theirs. So if we minimize ourselves to somebody and they project their values onto us or we inject it onto us, then we automatically think we're making a mistake. And if we do the same and look down on them and project our values on them, we're going to think they're making a mistake. But maybe they're not in their values, and maybe we're not in our values. Maybe we just haven't looked deep enough. Maybe there's a hidden order in the apparent chaos. That's why in the breakthrough experience, when I have people coming in there with pride or shame, I go in there and I neutralize them out until they love themselves. When you're proud, you're inauthentic. When you're ashamed, you're inauthentic. You're exaggerating and minimizing a persona covering up the real you. And when you put people on pedestals or in people in pits and inject the values or project the values, you automatically have inerred, you might say, lopsided perceptions, and you have a distortion of who they are. And this guarantees that you're going to project labels onto them, and you're going to, look down on them as a villain, or look up to them as a hero, or look down on yourself, or up at yourself. And either of these are not the authentic you. And you want to be loved for who you are, and you want them to be loved for who they are. So balance out the equation, and you dissolve the illusions of mistakes. You dissolve the illusions of their imperfections, and you start to appreciate your life. In the breakthrough experience, I teach people how to do that, and it's really amazing. They come into the breakthrough experience with these judgments on themselves or others, and then when they go through the Demartini method, it's dissolved, and they realize that there was a hidden order in the chaos, and they didn't know how to ask the right questions to balance it out, and then they realize there's nothing to fix. And when there's nothing to fix, their will, the way they wanted it, now matches the way it is, and now they're grateful. Whenever you project your values on them and expect them to live in your values, or inject their values into you and expect to live in their values, you're going to have this perception that you thought you made mistakes, and you're going to see the imperfections of nature of life. But the second you ask the right questions and balance out the equation and understand people live in their values and you live in yours, a whole lot of difference comes along. You'll have more gratitude, more appreciation for life, more love for yourself and other people. You'll be more inspired. You'll be more enthused about life. You'll be more certain and present about life. And those are very powerful transcendental states that allow us to live a more fulfilled life. So are we really having mistakes, or are we basically projecting our values onto others or injecting their values into us and trying to get others to live in our values or us into their values? This is an interesting question. So stop and reflect and make sure whenever you hear yourself saying, I should, I ought to, I'm supposed to, I got to, I have to, I must, I need to, you're guaranteed that those are injected values by some outer authority that you're trying to live in. And that you're guaranteed to be thinking, oh, I'm not living up to that expectation. And anytime you say you should, you ought to, you got to, you have to, you must, you need to, you got the same thing projected. Listen to your imperative language. Got to, have to, must, should, ought to, supposed to, need to. All of those are signs of projections and injections and guarantees to create the thoughts that there's mistakes going on. And these lead to prides or shames. And you start to think, well, there's something wrong with me, when in fact there isn't. The magnificence of who you are is far greater than all those things you impose on yourself. So give yourself permission to shine, not shrink. Give yourself permission to be authentic, not inauthentic. And give yourself permission to live according to your own values and articulate your values in terms of other people's values, and hire people that are inspired to do what you want done so you have less labels on them and more appreciation for their contribution. And it frees you up to do the same in your life, to live by priority and be more productive. So just want to take a few moments to share how important it is to not buy into the idea that there's mistakes. Look beyond that, find the hidden order in the apparent chaos, and realize it's value driven. That if you try to live in other people's values, you'll have futility. If you try to get others to live in your values, you'll have futility. But if you communicate your values in terms of other people's values, you have utility. And that's where you have sustainable fair exchange, and you don't feel like you're making mistakes and sabotaging and self-depreciating or depreciating other people and thinking they do the same. So just want to take that few moments to talk about that, and just know that the breakthrough experience, particularly in the section where I show people how to determine their values and how to live congruently according to it, so they have less self-depreciation, and doing the Demartini method, dissolving all the emotional baggage that you thought you've made mistakes in your life, which is keeping you from being grateful and empowered in life. I can show you how to dissolve that, and you'll do it, so you learn it. You'll have that for life. So come and join me at the breakthrough experience so I can transform that perception that you thought was a mistake in your life or others' lives, and allow you to see the magnificent order that may be there after all. So until next week, I'll see you then, or I'll see you at the breakthrough experience.